The Dogger Bank Incident, also known as the Russian Outrage or Hull Incident, is a dramatic and bizarre episode in naval history that took place on the night of October 21st, 1904, during the Russo-Japanese War. This incident occurred in the North Sea, where the Russian Baltic Fleet, en route to the Far East, mistakenly attacked a fleet of British fishing trawlers, believing them to be Japanese warships. The consequences of this event were far-reaching, almost leading to a war between Russia and Britain and adding to Russia's humiliation during the war. In 1904, Russia was engaged in a brutal and costly war with Japan over control of territories in Manchuria and Korea. This war had broken out because of conflicting imperial ambitions in the region, with Japan emerging as a rising military power and Russia seeking to expand its influence in East Asia. The conflict primarily took place around the Korean Peninsula, the Yellow Sea, and the Liaodong Peninsula, with naval superiority playing a crucial role. At the beginning of the war, Japan had the upper hand thanks to its modernized navy and a well-planned surprise attack on the Russian Pacific Fleet at Port Arthur, in present-day China, in February 1904. The Russian fleet was caught off guard, suffering significant damage. In an attempt to recover, Tsar Nicholas II of Russia ordered the Baltic Fleet to sail halfway around the world, from the Baltic Sea to the Pacific, to reinforce the Russian naval presence in the Far East. The Baltic Fleet, under the command of Admiral Zinovy Rozhestvensky, set sail from Kronstadt on October 15, 1904. The journey was a daunting one, as the fleet had to navigate around Europe, through the Atlantic, down the coast of Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope, and finally across the Indian Ocean to reach its destination. It was a massive undertaking involving over 40 warships and support vessels. The Russian fleet was on edge as it embarked on this epic voyage. Reports of Japanese submarines and torpedo boats operating in European waters, although false, created a pervasive sense of paranoia among the sailors. The fleet had already received intelligence, again inaccurate, suggesting that Japanese warships might attempt to intercept the Baltic Fleet before it could reach the Pacific. As a result, Admiral Rozhestvensky ordered his ships to be on high alert, especially during the night, when an attack seemed most likely. As the Baltic Fleet sailed through the North Sea on the night of October 21st, it passed near Dogger Bank, a shallow area teeming with British fishing boats. The trawlers were part of the Hull fishing fleet, which regularly operated in these waters, oblivious to the international tensions brewing nearby. Around midnight, Russian lookouts spotted the fishing boats on the horizon. In the dim light and through the fog of war, some Russian officers became convinced that these boats were Japanese torpedo craft lying in wait. Panic spread through the fleet, and without proper identification or warning, the Russian warships opened fire on the fishing vessels. For nearly 20 minutes, the Russian fleet bombarded the trawlers with machine gun fire and shells, creating chaos and confusion among the British fishermen who had no idea why they were being attacked. The Russian fleet even mistakenly fired on some of its own vessels in the confusion. Despite the panic, the fishing boats managed to survive the onslaught, though some were heavily damaged. By the time the Russians realized their mistake, it was too late. 2 British fishermen had been killed, and 6 others were injured. Several boats were badly damaged or sunk. The Russian cruiser Aurora sustained minor damage from friendly fire, but the Russian fleet continued its journey as if nothing had happened, leaving behind a trail of devastation and international outrage. News of the Dogger Bank incident quickly reached Britain, sparking public outrage. The British press condemned the attack as an unprovoked and cowardly act, and the Russian government was vilified. The British fishing community, particularly in Hull, was furious at the loss of life and the destruction of property. The British government, led by Prime Minister Arthur Balfour, found itself in a difficult position. Britain was not involved in the Russo-Japanese War, but it was allied with Japan through the Anglo-Japanese Alliance of 1902. While Balfour sought to avoid a war with Russia, the British public and political establishment demanded action. The Royal Navy was placed on high alert, and there were calls for immediate retribution. Foreign Secretary Lord Lansdowne delivered a stern diplomatic note to the Russian government, demanding a formal apology, compensation for the victims, and punishment for those responsible. In the meantime, British warships shadowed the Russian fleet as it continued its journey through the English Channel, ensuring that no further incidents occurred. The Russian government, embarrassed by the incident, initially tried to downplay the event, blaming it on the chaotic circumstances of wartime. However, under immense diplomatic pressure, Tsar Nicholas II and his advisors realized that they could not afford a war with Britain, which possessed the world's most powerful navy. Russia was already stretched thin by its conflict with Japan and internal unrest at home. Admiral Rozhestvensky, who had been commanding the fleet at the time of the attack, defended his actions by claiming that he genuinely believed the fishing boats were Japanese torpedo craft. Nonetheless, the Russian government agreed to submit the case to international arbitration to avoid further escalation. The matter was taken to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague, which had been established to resolve international disputes peacefully. The court found Russia responsible for the attack on the British fishing fleet and ordered compensation to be paid to the victims. In 1905, Russia paid £66,000, equivalent to over £7 million today, in damages to the families of the fishermen and the owners of the damaged trawlers. The Dogger Bank incident was a significant embarrassment for Russia, both domestically and internationally. It exposed the incompetence and paranoia within the Russian military command, which was already struggling to manage the war against Japan. The incident also highlighted the inadequacies of Russia's naval forces, which were ill-prepared for modern warfare and prone to costly mistakes. The incident added to the growing dissatisfaction with Tsar Nicholas II's regime, which was already facing criticism for its handling of the Russo-Japanese War and domestic issues. The war would continue to go poorly for Russia, culminating in the decisive Battle of Tsushima in May 1905, where the Japanese Navy destroyed the remnants of the Russian Baltic Fleet. This defeat would eventually lead to the Treaty of Portsmouth and the end of the war in September 1905, with Russia conceding significant territorial and political losses. At home, the Dogger Bank incident and the broader failures of the war contributed to rising unrest. The Russian Revolution of 1905, sparked by widespread dissatisfaction with the government's handling of the war, would challenge the authority of the Tsar and force Nicholas II to make political concessions, including the establishment of a State Duma, parliament. Despite the initial tensions between Britain and Russia following the Dogger Bank incident, the two nations managed to avoid a direct conflict. The British government, mindful of the larger geopolitical context and its alliance with Japan, sought to de-escalate the situation once Russia had agreed to arbitration. In the long run, the Dogger Bank incident helped to shape future Anglo-Russian relations. In 1907, just a few years after the incident, Britain and Russia would sign the Anglo-Russian Entente, a diplomatic agreement that resolved several long-standing colonial disputes and paved the way for cooperation between the two powers in the lead-up to World War I. This agreement, along with the earlier Franco-Russian alliance, would form the basis of the Triple Entente, which opposed the Central Powers in World War I. The Dogger Bank incident stands as a remarkable example of military miscalculation and diplomatic crisis. What began as a routine fishing expedition in the North Sea turned into an international incident that nearly plunged two major powers into war. While the incident itself may seem absurd in hindsight, a paranoid fleet attacking unarmed fishing boats, it had significant consequences for both Russia and Britain. For Russia, it was yet another humiliation in a war that was already going disastrously wrong. For Britain, it was a sobering reminder of the dangers of international tensions and the importance of diplomacy. The successful resolution of the incident through arbitration marked an early victory for international law and peaceful conflict resolution, even as the world headed toward greater conflicts in the 20th century. In the end, the Dogger Bank incident serves as a cautionary tale about the perils of war, miscommunication, and the dangers of acting on fear and suspicion in the heat of conflict.